What would you do if a stranger looked you dead in the eye and told you your whole future in one sentence right there between your coffee pot and the pie case because a man in a dark suit sat in booth 7 of our little diner, lifted his cup like a toast, and said, calm as Sunday morning, "By spring, you'll birth me 3 sons." The forks stopped. The rain on the windows got louder, and I forgot how to breathe for a second. I laughed because what else do you do when reality slips on a wet floor and lands at your feet? You know what I mean, but he didn't laugh. He didn't even flinch. He just laid a stack of hundreds on the table and said, "Keep the change, you'll need it for the babies." Then he slid into his coat, nodded at me like he'd ordered pie to go, and said, "I'll see you tomorrow evening." "Miss Brooks?" The bell over the door jingled, and he disappeared into the rain. If it were you, what would you have done? My name is Raina, and that night I drove home through puddles big enough to swallow my old Honda whole cut. A slice of leftover pie for my mama tucked the Afghan up to her chin and stood in the kitchen light, like it might tell me what to think. I'm not fancy with prayers, but I'm faithful with them. So I put my hands on the counter and whispered, "Lord, if this is you, help me see it. And if it's not, help me keep my job and my peace." The storm kept drumming, the TV mumbled to itself, and somewhere in the mix of fear and curiosity, something shifted. He came back the next evening at 6 on the dot, same table, same stillness that made the air around him feel like a chapel. I walked over with my notepad and said quietly, "We need to talk about what you said." "I can wait," he replied, eyes steady. "What time do you get off?" "9, I told him, and he nodded, like time belonged to him, and he was willing to loan me a little. 3 hours later, I slid into the booth across from him, apron still on heart, doing a tap dance, and I asked the only question that made sense, why me? He folded his hands and told me about metal twisted like thorns, and snow that swallowed sound. A private plane in the Rockies, 3 days trapped under wreckage, his fiancée gone, his life cracked down the middle. Then he said, in the cold and the quiet, "I saw a room full of light, and I saw you. You were holding 3 newborn boys, and a voice I can't explain said, 'She'll give you sons of mercy.' I've been searching 2 years, and last week I saw you through this window, and I knew." I wanted to tell him visions belong to Sunday school and soft old ladies who see angels in their teacups. But grief looks the same on every kind of face, and his carried it honest. "Miss Hattie." My boss pulled me into the kitchen and said in that blend of mama and manager, "Girl men like that don't see girls like us as equals, mind your boundaries." I heard her, I did. But back at booth 7, there was a man who said God spoke to him in a mountain, and somehow my name got caught in it. The week rolled on. He came every night, ordered black coffee, tipped like he was paying rent on the table, never crossed a line. One evening, a drunk at the counter got loud, tossed an ugly word in my direction, like it was clever, and before I could decide whether to swallow it or set the place on fire, my stranger stood between us, voice low, steady. "You owe this lady an apology." He didn't bark, he didn't threaten, he just said, "The way you speak to God's children is everyone's business." Then he put his card down and told Miss Hattie to put everyone's meal on him, including the man who'd insulted me. When I thanked him, he said a line that hooked into my ribs. "A man who fears God protects his daughters." I didn't swoon, but I won't lie, something inside me thawed. Then came the envelope. Morning dawned, clear rain finally done, and he was waiting at the door before my shift, tall shadow in the glass. "I need to speak with you privately, if possible." Inside, under the humming lights and the smell of bacon and coffee, he slid a white envelope across the counter like a secret. "My company is facing a hostile takeover. There's a family stability clause in our bylaws. If I can show I'm in a committed relationship, I can stop it, protect jobs, keep the board from selling us for parts. I need someone to pose as my fiancé for 3 months. You'll be compensated generously. Your mother's medical bills, past and future, fully covered. Everything legitimate. I stared at the envelope like it might bite. That's what this is, I said, hurt sliding under my words. All of this. Getting to know me, saving me from a drunk, bringing a Bible to my booth. Practice for a business deal. He shook his head, patient, but not cold. Pray about it. That's all I'm asking. Lunch rush came, and with it Mrs. Whitfield and her club friends, women who smell like gardenias and old money. I placed a lemon wedge on her saucer, the same as always, and she said loudly, "I specifically asked for lemon with my tea." "Yes, ma'am," I said, "it's right there." "Don't take that tone with me," she announced, and her chair scraped back like a cymbal crash. She called for Miss Hattie and staged a little play about respect and training, and Miss Hattie listened with that tight face small business owners wear when the rent is due and the power bill is late, and then she asked me into the office and said the words that knocked the wind out of me. "I'm sorry, Raina. I can't risk losing her table." I cleaned out my locker with hands that wouldn't steady and found that white envelope tucked under my apron like a dare. Pride is a beautiful coat until it's raining inside your house. I put the offer on my kitchen table, opened it with the same hands I'd just used to wipe tears from my mama's cheeks, and read. Clean, generous, terrifying. A text buzzed my phone. The offer stands. God doesn't open doors for nothing. I don't know if it was faith or fear or both holding hands, but I called the next morning, said one word, yes. His name was Kevin Drayton. And if the name rings a bell, it's because sometime between 26 and 34, he built a company. The world decided it couldn't live without, then disappeared after the crash, like a king who left his own castle. He drove me up into the Blue Ridge past fields and pines along a river that caught the light like it was made of coins, and we turned a bend, and there it was, glass and stone and timber laid out like a modern psalm with a small chapel tucked into the trees, as if the house knew it needed a heart. "Welcome home," he said. I nodded, not because it was true yet, but because the chapel made it feel possible. Ms. Harrison, the housekeeper, smiled, like she'd seen a lot of comings and goings. Maria the cook pressed warm coffee into my hands and told me not to lift a finger, and I said, "Please call me Raina, because I needed at least my name to be ordinary." My suite was bigger than my whole apartment, back home, windows full of mountains, a tub like a lake. I unpacked the one good dress I owned, navy wrap style Easter clearance, and told the mirror, "Breathe." Mornings I slipped into the kitchen at dawn tied on an apron, despite Maria's protests, and let the simple things steady me. Dough under my palms, the click of measuring spoons, the comfort of onions going soft in butter. After lunch prep, I walked the grounds, hands in my jacket pockets, whispering prayers I didn't know how to say out loud. Not because I'm holy, but because the air up there felt like it was listening. Evenings, a fire cracked in the library hearth, and Kevin read from a leather Bible that had soft corners and colored tabs, his grandmother's, he said, and he'd ask, "What do you make of this?" And I'd give him a plain answer, and he'd treat it like it was rare. He told me about a vow he'd made after the crash: celibacy, not just body, but heart, a pause to listen for God before he put his hands on any future. You can roll your eyes if you want. I'm telling you, the humility sounded like relief. Then the gala arrived, the kind of room that sparkles even when the music stops, crystal and marble and opinions. He had a dress waiting, deep burgundy, modest lines, sleeves that felt like they were made to hold prayer. And I put it on with hands that shook just a little. He offered his arm at the top of the stairs, eyes soft, smile small, and we walked into a buffet of whispers. That's her, the waitress. I wanted to shrink, but he said to a bored wife who invited us to the club, "Thank you, Margaret. We prefer quiet evenings at home. She's teaching me simplicity." A reporter asked how we met, pen ready for the polite lie, and Kevin said, clear as a bell, "She served me grace before coffee." Then he led me to the floor, and when the band slid into Moon River, he put his hand at the small of my back and kissed me like a promise, gentle but sure. And the cameras flashed, and for a second, the world pinholed down to breath and music and the surprising rightness of it. Yeah, that happened. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. A week later, he brought my mother up for Christmas. No press release, no fuss. Said family shouldn't be split on holy days. And I watched him carry her suitcase himself. Watched him dice carrots while I rolled dumpling dough. Watched her eyes measure him and soften. We decorated the chapel with pine and candles and read Luke by candlelight. And I thought maybe prophecies are just God pulling two stubborn people toward each other by the same thread. Then the thread strained. I was bringing tea to his study when I heard voices through the half-open door, smooth and sharp older men who play golf more than they pray. The Waitress charity project, one said. Embarrassing optics, said a woman. I stood there holding a tray that suddenly felt like a shield and waited for my husband in contract to say, "Her name is Reina, and you will respect her in this house." He said nothing. Silence is a choice. I found him later and asked plainly, "Why didn't you defend me?" He talked about strategy and timing, shareholders and leverage. I said, "I don't need optics. I need truth with skin on it." He reached for my hand. I stepped back. The next morning I sat in a board meeting, a quiet prop in a pretty dress, and an executive made a joke with the word diner in it, and the room chuckled like cruelty had a tuxedo on, and Kevin cleared his throat and moved to the next agenda item. So I packed. I left the clothes he'd bought folded on the bed, took my thrift store coat and my old uniform as a reminder, wrote a note, and put it on his pillow. I can't be your image. I wanted to be your heart. Kissed my mother's forehead while she slept and drove down the mountain before dawn with a stomach full of rocks. Back home, the apartment smelled like absinthe and dust. Mrs. Peterson at the grocery put me in a green apron without too many questions. Blessed be women like that. And I worked until my feet remembered the ache like an old hymn. When Mama called, I lied because the truth hurt to say, "He's busy, I just needed some time home." And the lie tasted like metal. Then the news broke. Shaky footage podium lights. Kevin's face pale in a way I recognized as bone-deep tired. Then the stumble, the hand to his chest. The scramble of security. The feed cutting out. Breaking. Tech billionaire collapses, critical condition, undisclosed heart issue. I dropped a box of cereal and watched yellow circles bounce down the aisle like prayers escaping. Pride argued. Love won. I packed a small bag, told Mrs. Peterson I needed a few days, drove back into the mountains, with my hands tight on the wheel, and my heart thrumming a rhythm I prayed was not a goodbye. Hospitals smell like bleach and hope. At the desk, a woman asked family, and I said, "I'm someone who loves him." And that was the right answer, because his assistant, Sarah, appeared like a door opening and walked me to the ICU. Machines are honest. They tell the whole truth about how a body is fighting. Kevin looked smaller without his stillness built up around him, and I sat, took his hand, and put my truth in the air. I'm sorry I let pride talk louder than faith. I'm sorry I asked you to protect me in public without asking if you were bleeding in private. I'm sorry I ran before I knocked. Then I prayed out loud because I had no dignity left to protect God. If there's breath, give him more. If there's mercy, pour it twice. Near dawn, his eyelids fluttered. A monitor beeped a rhythm that felt like a wave turning. He whispered, "Spring, you'll birth me 3 sons." I leaned close, tears hot. "You never meant it literally, did you?" His fingers squeezed, weak but certain. The vision said, "Sons of mercy, not flesh, spirit, hope, faith, mercy." It hit me like a key turning. The sentence that had sounded like madness in a rain-soaked diner was a map, and we had been walking it without understanding. He was never promising me pregnancies, he was asking me to carry a purpose. He got better. The doctors said words like remarkable and improbable. Sarah called it answered prayer, I called it a second chance we'd spend carefully. We got married in the hospital chapel, with a borrowed cream dress, my mother in the front row, a pastor with kind eyes, vows spoken like we meant them, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. And his hand didn't shake when he slid the ring onto mine. We didn't fly anywhere. We drove home to the mountains and set to work. We turned the little chapel into a heartbeat for the town. Meals in the basement because you can't fix a resume when your stomach is arguing tutoring after school. Because algebra shouldn't be a cliff apartments upstairs for single moms and veterans. Because dignity needs a door that locks and a light that works. We called it the 3 Sons Foundation, not because we liked slogans, but because we'd seen what hope and faith and mercy could build when they put on work boots. Maria, first in the program with her bright-eyed daughter, handed me a crayon picture of 3 stick figures under a crooked sun that paper lives on my fridge like a relic. Marcus, a veteran who slept light enough to hear the wind change, stood in the chapel one afternoon and said, "I haven't felt peace in a decade," and we didn't promise him a miracle. We gave him a chair, a counselor, a hot meal, and time. Ribbon-cutting day, spring in the air, like a promise, reporters, who once whispered charity case now angling for quotes. Kevin spoke first, straight to camera. 2 years ago, I said a waitress would birth me 3 sons. Today, you can meet them, hope, faith, mercy, living in these families, working in these classrooms, walking out of this building with their heads up. Then I said, this isn't about saving anyone. It's about creating family where the world sells isolation. We answered questions until my cheeks hurt from smiling, and then we went home and sat on the back steps and let the quiet climb up our shoulders like a shawl. That should be the end, right? Neat bow, miracle, marriage, shiny foundation. But real life lives in the questions that don't bow. People ask me, should a billionaire be able to tilt a town with a signature? Is that generosity or power in a prettier dress? People ask, did I sell out when I signed a contract to pretend even for a cause? Or did I step through a messy door into a bigger truth, one you can't always access by perfect means? People ask, is it wise to mix faith with corporate strategy? Or is that the only way some rooms remember people are not line items? Do you think that's fair? And say it plain. Here's my plane. I said yes to a deal and stayed for a covenant. I left to keep my dignity and came back to build a purpose. I believed a prophecy that turned out to be about the kind of children love makes when love goes to work. I still need Kevin to speak up in rooms that reward silence, and he needs me to listen when my hurt outshouts the facts. We are not stained glass. We are 2 stubborn souls sanding each other down to kindness one day at a time. My mother still tucks little folded verses into my coat pocket and prays at odd hours. Maria still tries to overpay me with cookies. Marcus still sits in the 3rd pew and breathes like it's a skill he's learning again. And some mornings I still walk the path to the chapel and tell God I don't deserve any of this. But thank you for letting me hold it. Last week we walked the orchard at sunset, petals drifting like confetti. The wind forgot to clean up, and Kevin said quietly, "You kept your promise." I laughed because I hadn't made one I knew of, and he said, "Hope in that hospital. Faith when you drove back up the mountain. Mercy in every door you hold open." I told him he could stop making me cry in public, and he kissed my forehead, and the mountains turned gold. Yeah, that happened. So now I'm asking you, when someone speaks a wild future over your life, do you check the fruit or the flash? When the room gets cold and your name is used like a punchline, do you stay and fight, or leave and live, or return with purpose once you know what you're fighting for? When money and mercy show up holding hands, do you trust them to walk straight? If it were you, what would you have done? If this story found a place to sit in, you tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what part you argued with. Tell me what part felt like home. And if you've ever had a moment that flipped your whole understanding in one breath, I want to hear it. Drop your take, your pushback, your own diner prophecy. Hit like if you believe hope, faith, and mercy can be born in places that once felt empty. Hit subscribe. If you want more stories told, plain and true, share this with someone who needs a second chance today. And stick around, because tomorrow I'm bringing a story that will blow your mind.